Well, good evening, everyone. It is Tuesday, March 28th, and I wanted to jump on. I've been in and out, and I realized that, but I wanted to take some time today to spend speaking about a subject. And what I'm ultimately trying to do is tie in sobriety. And, people have said, I drink because my job. My job drives me to drink. I drink because my girlfriend and I aren't getting along. Or I drink because I have unruly kids. Like, I want to start tying these into real life examples and talk about those things. And you'll have to excuse my kitty if he comes around. It's getting a little late here, so I won't keep you up too long. So, if you can teach people to stand up and in the face of the things they're afraid of, they get stronger. And you don't know what the upper limits to that are. If you take people and you expose them voluntarily to things that they're avoiding and are afraid of, you know that they need to overcome in order to meet their goals. Their self-defined goals. If you can teach people to stand up in the face of the things that they're afraid of, they get stronger. And you don't know what the upper limits to that are. Because you might ask yourself, like, if in 10 years, if you didn't avoid doing what you knew you needed to do by your own definitions, right? Within the value structure that you've created, to the degrees that you've done that, what would you be like? Well, there are remarkable people who come into the world from time to time. And there are people who do find out over decades. And there are people who do find out over long periods what they could be like if they were who they were, if they spoke. They're being forward. And they get stronger and stronger and stronger. And we don't know the limits to that. And so you could say, well, in that part, perhaps the reason that you're suffering unbearably can be left at your feet because you're not everything you could be. And you know it. And of course, that's a terrible thing to admit. And it's a terrible thing to consider, right? But there's real promise in it because it means that perhaps there's another way that you could look at the world in another way, that you could act in the world. So what it would reflect back to, you'd be much better than what it gave back to you. No. My experiences with people that were probably running at about 51% of our capacity, something mean. You can think about this yourselves. I often ask students or college grads I've worked with, how many hours a day you waste? How many hours a week you waste? And the classic answer is something like 4 to 6 hours a day. Insufficient studying, watching things on YouTube that not only do you not want to watch that, why don't you even care? It make you feel horrible about watching it after you're done. That's probably 4 hours right there, huh? 4 hours, Think, well, okay, so that's 20, 25 hours a week. It's 100 hours a month. That's 2.5 full work weeks. It's half a year of work weeks per year. And if your time is worth $20 an hour, which is a radical underestimate, it's probably more like 50. If you think about it in terms of deferred wages, okay? If you're wasting 20 hours a week, you're wasting $50,000 a year. And you are doing that right now. And it's because you're young. Wasting $50,000 a year is a way big catastrophe than it would be for me to waste it, because I'm not going to last nearly as long. And so if your life isn't everything it could be, you can ask yourself, what would happen if you just stopped wasting the opportunities that are right there in front of you? You would know how much more efficient, 10 times more efficient, 20 times more efficient. Okay? That's the ratio. You have no idea how efficient people get. It's off the charts, actually. Well, and if we all got our act together collectively and stop making things worse, because that's another thing people do all the time. Not only do they not do what they should to make things better, they actively attempt to make things worse because they're spiteful or resentful, or arrogant or deceitful or homicidal, or all of those things all bundled together in an absolutely pathological package. If people stopped really trying just to make things worse, we have no idea how much better they would get just because of that. So there is this weird dynamic that's part of the existential system of ideas between human vulnerability and social judgment. I said that right? Both of which are major causes of suffering, okay? And the failure of individuals to adopt the responsibility that they know they should adopt. And that's the thing that's interesting too, and I like another thing. I often have asked college grads that I've worked with, there's this idea that people have a conscience, okay? And what the conscience is. It's this feeling or voice, right? You have it in your head. And just before you do something that you know is stupid, telling you probably you shouldn't do that stupid thing. Oh, hold on, my cat. Get down. Get down. You don't have to listen to it, strangely enough. But you go ahead and you do it anyway. And then, of course, exactly what the conscience told you is going to inevitably happen, so that you feel even stupider about it than you would if it happened by accident, because you didn't know. I knew this was going to happen. I got a warning it was going to happen. And I went and I did it anyways. And the funny thing is that the conscious operates within people, and we really don't understand what the hell that is. So you might say, well, what would happen if you abided by your conscious for 5 years or for 10 years? What sort of position might you be in? What sort of family might you have? What sort of relationship maybe you were able to forge? And you can be bloody sure that a relationship that's forged on the basis of who you actually are is going to be a lot stronger and more welcome than one that forged on the basis of who you aren't. Now, of course, that means there's people you're with that has to deal with the full force of you, and all your ability and your catastrophe. And that's a very, very difficult thing to negotiate. But if you do negotiate it well, at least you have something, okay? You have somewhere solid to stand, and you have somewhere to live. You have a real life, and it's a great basis upon which to bring children into the world, for example, because you can have an actual relationship with them instead of torturing them half to death, which is what happens in a tremendous large minority of cases. Well, it's more than that too, because this is what I'm getting close. I wanted to introduce Solzhenitsyn's writings to you. You see, it isn't merely that your faith depends on whether or not you get your act together and to what degree, you decide that you're going to live out your own genuine being. It isn't only your fate, it's the fate of everyone that you're networked with. And so, you think, well, there's 9 billion, 7 billion people in the world. We're going to be to peak about 9 billion, by the way, and then it'll decline rapidly. But 7 billion people in the world, and who are you? You're just one little dust mite amongst that 7 billion. And so it really doesn't matter what you do or don't do, but that's simply not the case. It's the wrong model, because you're at the center of a network. You're a node in a network. And of course, that's even more true now that we have social media. You'll know 1,000 people at least over the course of your life. And they'll know 1,000 people each. And that puts you one person away from 1 billion, 2 persons away from 1 billion. So that's how you're connected, and all the things you do, like dropping a stone in the pond, right? The ripples move outward, and they affect things in ways that you can't fully comprehend. And it means that the things that you do and that you don't do are far more important than you think. When, of course, terror of realizing that it actually starts to matter what you do, is that you might say, well, that's better than living a meaningless existence it's better for it to matter. But I mean, if you really asked yourself what you'd be if you had the choice, I can live with no responsibility whatsoever. The price I pay is that nothing matters. Or I can reverse it and everything matters. But I have to take the responsibility that is associated with that. It's not so obvious to me that people would take the meaningful path. Now, when you say, well, nihil, because there's no meaning and they still suffer, yeah. But the advantage is they have no responsibility. So that's the payoff, and I actually think that's the motivation. Say, well, I can't help being collapsed. It's like, yeah, maybe you've just allowed them to collapse because it's a hell of a lot easier than acting them out. And the price you pay is a meaningless, but people feel sorry for you. And you have the option of taking the pathway, the martyr. So that's the pretty, all things considered, especially when the alternative is to bear, especially your burden properly and to live forthright in the world. Well, what we figured out in so many people in the 20th century, even though if you live a pathological life, you pathologize your society. And if enough people do that, then it's hell.